Anxiety is not just one feeling, I think. It's a mixture of many different feelings. Most people, I think, are not able to recognize anxiety, and I was unable to recognize anxieties because it gets confused with feeling nervous, feeling stressed, or worried. People mostly describe anxiety like over worrying for something, but having suffering from anxiety uh, for the last 2 years and actually paying attention to it, I see that anxiety is not just over worrying, or it's just not overly stressed. It's actually a mixture of different emotions. Well, for example, when I feel anxious, I can recognize that it's not just worrying. I'm feeling worried and at the same time feeling a feeling of impending doom. Worry or a loss of control. I'm sometimes feeling anger, frustration, and maybe also worry. Maybe it starts with worry, but then it becomes stressed, and then frustration, and then becomes anger, and then comes back to worry, and it just keeps going round and round. Sometimes it's a feeling of, starts with worry, and then it goes to frustration, then it goes to overwhelmingness, then it goes to feeling of unloved, and then feeling of worthlessness, then comes back to worrying. So it's really not just one feeling, it's a combination of many, and based on the situation that I'm in, I get a different feeling of anxiety every time. So would you say social anxiety, so something like social anxiety is different from maybe another form of anxiety? Yes, so for example, I have social anxiety as well. So that means when I'm in a social gathering, I feel like I'm being judged. I feel I don't belong here, I don't fit in. I feel awkward, and that feeling overwhelms me, and then I feel stressed, and then I feel frustrated, and then I try to calm myself, and then I start worrying again that everybody's judging me. So, in social circumstances, that's how I feel. Whereas maybe just sitting at home, like just watching TV, and maybe my husband's not home and he's supposed to be home at a certain time, I start having an anxiety attack. Like, it starts with worry, and then I start having negative thoughts about bad things could have happened to him, and then that goes to more worrying, and then I feel stressed, and then I feel panicked, and then I feel, basically anxious. So depending on the situation, I feel different things. So why is it so important to talk about having suffering from anxiety for the last 2 years and actually paying attention to it? I see that anxiety is not just over worrying, or it's just not overly stressed. It's actually a mixture of different emotions. Well, for example, when I feel anxious, I can recognize that it's not just worrying. I'm feeling worried and at the same time feeling a feeling of impending doom. Worry or a loss of control. I'm sometimes feeling anger, frustration, and maybe also worry. Maybe it starts with worry, but then it becomes stressed, and then frustration, and then becomes anger, and then comes back to worry, and it just keeps going round and round. Sometimes it's a feeling of, starts with worry, and then it goes to frustration, then it goes to overwhelmingness, then it goes to feeling of unloved, and then feeling of worthlessness, then comes back to worrying. So it's really not just one feeling, it's a combination of many, and based on the situation that I'm in, I get a different feeling of anxiety every time. Yes, so for example, I have social anxiety as well. So that means when I'm in a social gathering, I feel like I'm being judged. I feel I don't belong here, I don't fit in. I feel awkward, and that feeling overwhelms me, and then I feel stressed, and then I feel frustrated, and then I try to calm myself, and then I start worrying again that everybody's judging me. So, in social circumstances, that's how I feel. Whereas maybe just sitting at home, like just watching TV, and maybe my husband's not home and he's supposed to be home at a certain time, I start having an anxiety attack. Like it starts with worry, and then I start having negative thoughts about bad things could have happened to him, and then that goes to more worrying, and then I feel stressed, and then I feel panicked, and then I feel, basically anxious. So depending on the situation, I feel different things. It's very important to talk about anxiety because I think most people don't realize that anxiety happens in everyone. It's a feeling that we are born with. It's not an emotion, or it's not a feeling that spurs or happens in adulthood. People think that, you start feeling stress and anxiety when you get a job, or when you go to university, when you are in an environment that is stressful or has a lot of pressure on you. But that's a misconception. That's a myth. Anxiety is one of the basic survival instincts that we're all born with. Most people think, there's like feeling of happiness, sadness, anger, and I don't know, fear. These are the 4 most common emotions that people talk about and know about. But anxiety is something that should be added to that, because something that I didn't know is apparently we feel anxiety even in the fetal stage, according to my therapist. And children feel anxiety, children feel stressed. It's not just something that happens in adulthood. Well, that's the thing though. We don't know what anxiety looks like in children. We think that when they're crying, they must be feeling scared, or or it's just babies, children, they cry. But something that we don't try to identify is that maybe they're feeling anxious. And I was watching this YouTube video about parents who have a twin sibling, and they were just messing around with their babies. And the twin mommies or twin daddies show up in front of the baby and asking the baby, who's your mommy, who's your daddy? And some of the really younger babies, like who are a few months old enough to recognize faces but not old enough to walk, they were so confused. And so that look where your child might suddenly have this expression of fear or concern over their face, it's mostly like a blank look. And we think that, that's just so cute, that's just how babies look. But sometimes they might actually, that may be a look where they're processing information, or they're not able to process what they're seeing. And if the child starts crying right after, that means the child has felt an immense amount of stress and anxiety. Because like in that video where the baby started crying, where they couldn't identify which one was their mother or their father, they just broke down. And that's exactly how I cry when I have a severe anxiety attack. I break down just like a baby, and it's like a deep one, cry with a one breath, and just like yell it out. I can't explain it, but it's like when a baby is extremely anxious or fearful, that cry that they give, it's the exact same cry that I give. So I think I started to kind of research this, because I was like, why do I cry like a child, when I get anxious? And then, I started to, and then when my therapist said that, children feel anxiety too, it's just that it's not talked about. And then I can now identify when I look at a kid or a child, if they're feeling anxious or if they're just scared. Anxious. Well, if the child is crying out of fear, something scary must have happened around him. Maybe a loud noise, maybe a scary face, or maybe somebody tried to go boo, and then the child cries, then, maybe that's sudden fear, a sudden shock. But like, for example, in that video where just the twin parents, the twins were kind of messing around with the kid, they were thinking it's all fun, nothing scary is happening, and so what is causing the baby to cry? The baby must be feeling extreme stress, extremely overwhelmed with this, like she or he knows that I have one mother, and now I see two faces, and that's extreme feeling of stress. I'm sure the baby's going, and then they have an anxiety attack, and they probably just start crying. So it's important to identify and watch the emotions of your babies. I'll give you another example. One of my husband's friends, he came to visit from New York, and they had a very cute 15-month-old, I think. She was a toddler. She just learned how to walk. So she fell in the living room, and she fell on the carpet. She didn't get hurt, and I was in the kitchen. My husband was in the living room. I couldn't see her because she got obscured behind the sofa. But I heard my husband saying, "Oh my God, you fell? Are you okay?" And that's when I looked up, but I couldn't see her where she had fallen, and I wasn't hearing her cry or any kind of noise. So I thought she was okay. And my husband also went back to doing whatever he was. His back was turned to her. So nobody was seeing her, right? So I come around my kitchen, and I come to the living room, and I see she's standing there, like with the finger in her mouth. Her eyes are filled with tears, but with this look of terror in her face. Like, why isn't someone picking me up? Or why isn't someone doing something? Like, she was so anxious, I would say now. At first I thought she was scared, and I was like, what happened? I didn't realize that face, that feeling, or whatever she was going through was from that fall, because she didn't cry out immediately, so we assumed she was okay. She didn't get hurt physically. I quickly ran to her, and as I was talking to her, she started, and she was gonna let out that big anxious cry, and I quickly picked her up, and I was telling my husband, why didn't you pick her up? She is so scared. She fell. And my husband said, oh, I thought she was okay, she's not crying. I'm like, and then she gave out that big cry, and I was just holding her and rocking her. She felt anxious, maybe a feeling of scared, stressed. She didn't need any physical support. She could get up on her own. She wasn't physically hurt, injured in any way, but she needed that emotional support, somebody to comfort her. And because I wasn't her mother, and she didn't know me that well, she didn't stop crying. So as soon as the mother came running, hearing her cry, she picked her up, and then she stopped crying. And I was telling my husband, you need to pick up a child when they fall, and he's like, oh, you know what, if you keep picking them up, they'll just keep getting used to it, and they'll always want you to pick them up. I'm like, well, we can't paint all children with the same brush. I mean, yeah, if she just got up and started running around and playing and going by her day, yeah, she doesn't need the attention, and I wouldn't go running after her. But maybe she's the kind of a child who needs the emotional support. She didn't need the physical support. She was fine. She didn't need someone to help her up. She just needs someone to know that someone's there for her. So these things we don't identify. We don't try to recognize the needs of every single child. One child might be older, might be a 5-year-old, might need more emotional support than maybe a younger one who's 3-year-old who doesn't need any support. So instead of painting these parental rules or these rules we have about how to raise or take care of children with just one brush or one rule, we really need to look at every child and identify what they might be going through in a particular situation. Yes, anxiety does manifest in different ways. So in 2015, when I first started feeling anxiety, it looked like a bit of shivering. It felt like shivering. I wasn't actively worried. I wasn't actively feeling anything. I just felt a little bit of sad. But what I noticed was when I was in groups or in social gatherings in front of people, I was shivering. The shivering first started with my legs, and then they moved up to my chest. And it wasn't a kind of shivering where I was feeling cold. I would be sweating and maybe even feeling warm, but at the time I don't know what I'm feeling. And if I didn't control it, or if I didn't remove myself from the situation that was making me anxious, you would be able to see my shiver, and it would be like something like this. And so that was in 2015 and 16. And then, as days went by, as months went by, it changed to more crying and breaking down at an anxiety attack. Like, I just cried like a child. And sometime last year, my anxiety attacks becoming more like muscle spasm. There were times when I couldn't open my fist, and I couldn't, my fists would go like this, and I couldn't open them, and my legs would start hurting. It was almost like my body was forcing itself to become a ball, and the more I resisted, the more it hurt. So it really does manifest in different ways, and the symptoms I have for anxiety might not be the same for someone else. Someone else could be feeling something totally different. So yeah, the many faces of anxiety. That's a very good question. If because we haven't spoken about anxiety, we don't talk about it, we don't know it exists, we don't know how to identify it, and that is why it's so important to talk about it, and introduce the words like anxiety, stress, frustration, overwhelmingness, feeling of worthlessness, feeling of unloved, uncared for. All of these feelings, we should talk about it more, and with children from a very young age, so that because we learn how to identify with emotion from a very young age, and mostly our parents use the words, are you sad, are you upset, are you angry, or just the 4 words, happy, sad, angry, or scared. But there's so many other facets of these emotions that exist and we feel. It's just because nobody talks to us about it, we don't know how to label, oh, this must be the feeling of anxiety, this must be what overwhelming feels like, this must be what stress feels like. We only start learning about these words in a much older age, and by then, and it's maybe it's too late, because what if a 6-year-old is feeling overwhelmed and anxious? What if your 3-year-old is feeling anxiety and panic? So it's important to talk about it at first, and then try to identify it. Is it anxiety, or is it just fear? Is it anxiety, or is it just worry? Is it anxiety, or is it just stress? And unless we talk about it, and unless we start identifying it, we really can't help anyone. But from what I've experienced, I would tell people that if you're feeling a mixture of emotions with worry, such as worrying and that's leading to a feeling of a total loss of control, or feeling of stuck, or feeling of impending doom, like the world's gonna end, or feeling of unloved, or feeling of sadness, even if you're just crying, and it starts with worrying, or it starts with stress, it starts with overwhelm, then that, I would say, is you're feeling anxious. And also during that time, again, it might happen in many people, it might not, you will have a lot of thoughts, and sometimes the thoughts would be so many thoughts that you won't be able to identify what thoughts you're having. I think that was what was happening with me in the very beginning. My thoughts were so fast and so many, I didn't even realize I was having hundreds and thousands of millions of thoughts at lightning speed. But I did feel overwhelmed with my own head, or with my own situation. But situation, I'm just sitting in the living room watching TV. What situation? So if it's happening at a scenario, or at a moment where nothing really significant has happened, that is a warning sign. Then you're having an anxiety attack, and you need to see someone about it. It's common to feel anxiety if something stressful has happened at work, or you have an exam coming up, or you have a job interview to go to, or you're waiting for a result of a job interview. To feel anxious during those moments, that's normal. We should actually talk about that. This is normal, and we should have coping mechanisms to deal with those things. But when you're having anxiety attack for the most simplest things that's happening with your life, like cooking, doing chores, watching TV, just hanging out with friends, doing things that you found enjoyable, but now you're finding anxious, then something more is wrong, and you should seek help immediately, instead of trying to cope with it and try to manage it yourself, because you just might be making it worse. So to summarize, to identify anxiety, it should be a mixture of many emotions. It should be many thoughts, or also no thoughts. It should be mostly predominantly feelings of worry, overwhelmingness, stress, frustration, anger, maybe even a little bit of fear, and it will just keep coming and coming, and you will not be able to stop it. Those are the best indicators of anxiety. you.